Welcome, everyone. This webinar is called Wealth Redistribution and the Law. It's a bit of a showcase capstone webinar of what we've been up to over the last couple years. Um, and the next slide, I can go over our flow for today. So we'll share some intros. We will kind of as a general framing, we'll explain kind of the laws that apply to the redistribution of wealth in the form of gifts. And generally, we won't focus as much on investments. And we'll organize the material according to who's giving the gift, whether that's people, foundations, donor advised funds, public charities, or businesses. We'll speak for about an hour about all of these topics and then go to Q&A for hopefully about 15 minutes. And my coworker Janelle has made these wonderful color and shape coded ways of characterizing each of these entities to make the material a little less dry and a little bit more colorful. Um, Basically, blue squares are foundations, yellow hearts are public charities, people are purple, businesses are this pink color, and so on. Our goal in just this hour webinar is to share some high-level concepts and insights and to otherwise give you a tour of the resources we've created. So you can return to the slides, use the links, deepen your knowledge. And in the chat, we'll make sure everyone has a link to these slides, and the recording we'll send to everyone afterwards as well. Um, yeah, and the recording will hopefully be made available on our YouTube channel, so anyone can watch it and you can share it with your friends. So these slides are full of links to the Law Center's resources, and this slide lists the resources we'll focus on today. Yeah, so there's a lot of material, and yeah, it contains years of research that we've done listening to the questions that we've been hearing from folks. The next slide will just dropping some links for folks that are here for legal continuing education credit. These are the forms that you can use. Just adjust my camera. And as far as so I think most people are here knowing a little bit about the Sustainable Economies Law Center. But this is a project gallery of what we're up to in 2025. If you don't know, we do many things to support solidarity economies, cooperatives, land return movements, economic democracy. And if you want to see the breadth of our work, you can check out our website or this project gallery. Okay, just a little intro. I started interning at the Law Center in 2021, and for the last 4 years, my work has focused on land and housing justice and wealth redistribution, often at the intersection of both of those topics. So my first project as an intern was to support the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative with their securities offering, which was a vehicle to tap grassroots finance to support permanently affordable community-controlled real estate. Um, and so I joined staff about 2 years ago, and I am kind of learning how to maneuver tax law, nonprofit law, endowment law, so that resources can flow freely to grassroots movement organizations like poor people-led mutual aid efforts or indigenous-led rematriation projects. I've learned a lot from being on the ground in Oakland with mutual aid and land liberation projects like Poor Magazine, which has led me again to return to the world of wealth hoarders and organize my people, like with resource generation, to radically redistribute wealth, land, and power. I took a stop at Next Egg along the way. I also work in the realm of real estate law, helping groups navigate our colonial system of property and to empower communities to develop policies like banning finance and corporations from acquiring homes. Okay. And um, So as far as our wealth redistribution work, which was one of the main projects I was brought on to the Law Center to amplify and kind of make it a more formal program, we've created a lot of resources in the last 2 years, hoping to equip funders with values-aligned legal resources, movement-aligned legal resources, to give more boldly and creatively. And as I've said, this is kind of a showcase of, after all the presentations we've given to different audiences, all the conversations we've had with different people in this field, these are a lot of the resources and learnings that are coming out of them. Our work is somewhat driven by the questions people ask us. And so these resources were designed to fill the gaps that we were sensing and that people were coming to us with. If you're working to redistribute wealth and you encounter questions and barriers we didn't address, we'd love to hear them. We can't guarantee we'll solve the problem, but they could spark some new areas of inquiry. So feel free to email me, and my email's on the screen. I'll pass it to Janelle.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad there's so many people here thinking about redistributing wealth. I'm very passionate about this topic. I'll share a little bit about me. So, my name is Janelle Orsi, and I co-founded Sustainable Economies Law Center in 2009. And right now, a lot of my focus, or recently, a lot of my focus has been on just how to redistribute wealth and land, particularly in the form of gift. I've come to really focus on gifting. And this marks a shift away from other areas that I've worked on for many years because the Law Center, for many years, we learned a lot about finance because we've helped create and support so many amazing cooperatives and grassroots enterprises. And we were always just wondering, how do we get them money? We need to get them money. And so we wanted to remove barriers so that everyday people could lend to and invest in these wonderful enterprises. So we taught ourselves about securities law and finance lender laws and retirement savings laws. And over the years, we wanted to make these topics just like down to earth and make them approachable and easy to understand for everyday people. So we would draw cartoons about them, but then we would also actually create legal and financial instruments. Like we co-founded the Next Egg project, which is to enable people to move their retirement savings into radical local investments. And so we've done a lot in this realm of moving money in the form of loans and investments. And we were pretty proud of that work. But a few years ago, I really shifted away from that. Because I suddenly began to feel like it was a trap, that all of these financial instruments we were creating were just perpetuating the model of control, controlling people, controlling land, controlling the movement of money. And whenever you try to control things, it's very common for regulations and laws to set in. And what I was beginning to feel was just that law was going to stop us at every step of the way, even though it really felt like we were kind of re-engineering how money flows in society. The reality is we were just kind of slowing everything down and getting mired in the law in particular. So I've written a lot and made a lot of cartoon videos about this shift in my understanding and in my priorities. And I'm not here to talk about that today, but I will share a bunch of links. But this is all just to say why I'm so passionate about talking about gifting. And I've really come to feel like the most transformative change we can make in society is to just stop saving money. And for a lot of people, this is kind of like mind blowing. But if you begin to imagine what would our life be like? What would our society be like if we didn't save money, if we didn't have to contract around and grasp onto wealth? Then what would happen? It's kind of beautiful. You'd probably just sort of fall in love with what you picture, which is just that wealth would flow. It would just have to flow in all these different ways that we haven't even imagined yet. And a lot of it would be in the form of gift. And I just kind of have this feeling that, well, the world that I want to live in, and probably the world we all want to live in, is a world where gifts are flowing at least 10 times the rate that they do now. And so that makes me think, well, if money's going to be flowing, money and wealth, really less money, more wealth, is flowing as gift, then how do we make sure there are no legal barriers to that? And really, the good news is there aren't really that many legal barriers. When you try to control the movement of money, as loans or purchases or investments, then there's all kinds of legal barriers. But when money flows as gift, there's very few barriers. The main barriers are actually people's misunderstanding of the law. There's a lot of myths about the law or just uncertainty and fear. And that's part of what we're here to clear up today. So, like Mo said, these slides are filled with links, most of which we will not talk about. This is going to be your resource library. You can come back and you can binge watch cartoons that I've made. And this slide and the next slide are just cartoons and also a lot of kind of sort of sarcastic TikTok videos that I made when I was rethinking everything about finance. So that'll be there for you. We have made a lot of other resources on finance and wealth redistribution. These are here, but we won't be talking about them today. Similarly, we have a lot of information about retirement savings, and that came from our project, thenextegg.org. So you can come here and learn more or join the Next Egg. But yeah, so let's talk about wealth redistribution in the law. Like I said, wealth redistribution is not complicated. But there are a lot of people out there who want to make you believe that it's complicated because they have an incentive to either have you keep your money or make things very complicated so that they can bill you more hours. And we're talking particularly about lawyers, financial advisors, and other professionals. And there are a lot of myths out there that I think have been perpetuated by professionals who really just do benefit from making things complicated. So, our advice, Mo and I are both lawyers who are more or less saying, don't trust the lawyers. The important thing is that you learn this stuff yourself as much as you can, so you know when to question what the professionals are saying. Okay, so let's start talking about people redistributing wealth. So when people give away their money, it's really quite simple. A lot of people think they should first put their money into a foundation or a donor advised fund, usually because they're seeking a tax benefit. But there may, in fact, be better tax benefits to just giving the money away directly. So let's start by talking about people giving to people. This is one of the most simple things and most beautiful things. And here you'll see some of our newer resources are highlighted here. But yeah, when people give to people, there's only a couple legal questions that really come up, and I'll talk about those right now. And this is one of my favorite legal areas. Like, I like to think about this law a lot, because if we were to all learn what is the difference between income and a true gift, then we're really opening the gate to a place of greater love and freedom with each other. I know it sounds funny to talk about law that way, but there's actually a Supreme Court case where the Supreme Court talks about, what does or doesn't flow from generosity. And there's a recognition that we don't want to tax and regulate the flow of love, the flow of generosity. And so the general principle, and this applies to everything in our presentation. It applies when foundations give gifts, it applies when businesses give gifts, and it also applies when people give gifts to each other, which is that if the gift flows from generosity, and if there's no expectation of getting something in return, and if it's also not arising out of a sense of moral duty, then that is a true gift and it's not taxable income. And so we have a few handouts on this that you can come back and read. And if this is a space that we move toward more, it also means that we're just giving more freely to each other and not putting constraints on each other. So it's also just kind of a nice way to be. So that's about untaxed gifts. What about this thing that people have heard of that is called gift tax? A lot of people hear the phrase gift tax and all of a sudden they're worried and they don't want to give gifts. But this is just a brief stop here to say you don't have to worry about gift tax. You really don't. Unless you're really, really wealthy and you plan to give away $13.99 million, then you only need to worry about it a little bit. So here's the basics, which is that if you give more than $19,000 to an individual or to a non-charity in 1 year, then you're going to have to file a form with your taxes. It's a pretty simple form that just says, I gave this money away. And you're going to need to keep that form forever because the form is not a form so you can pay taxes. It's a form so you can keep a record of all of the gifts that you make over time. So it's like keeping a tally. And the idea is that once you get to $13.99 million or more of gifts in your lifetime or after your death, then you'll pay taxes. So gift tax and estate tax are more or less the same thing. It's about finally taxing the gifts after they've reached a certain threshold. So again, you don't need to worry about this if you're giving less than 19,000 to a person in a year. And again, you don't have to pay anything until you reach that threshold. So what about when people raise money to give to other people? So let's say that you have a friend who's currently in an ICE detention facility and they can't raise money for their own legal fees. You might set up a GoFundMe, or you might just start collecting money for that person so they can so you can eventually transfer it to them or to their lawyer. And this kind of thing happens a lot. People are conduits of fundraising for each other for a lot of reasons. It happened a lot during COVID, and it brings up questions about whether the person who's sort of in the middle, the conduit, do they owe taxes? Do they need to comply with any regulations? And the short of it is that there's a key legal concept called agency law, which is where when the person in the middle is acting as an agent, either of the donors or of the recipients, like they're really kind of bound, they've made a commitment to one or the other to transfer these funds, then it's generally a lot easier and there's not taxable income. But there's actually a lot of nuance to this. So we've just written a new 12-page guide that talks through that nuance of when or when are there not taxes or other regulations that apply. But in general, I got kind of excited about this topic, just thinking, really individuals can be conduits of wealth redistribution. And in times of crisis, this is particularly important. And people need to do this for each other because the nonprofit sector and the government sector can't meet all of the needs um, that are going to arise. So, moving on, people giving to non 501c3 organizations. This is also very simple. The same questions come up about, is it a tax-free gift? Do I need to file a gift tax form? Those are basically the same questions, but yeah, in general, people can give to non 501c3s quite easily. And then people give to 501c3s. People know that this happens quite often. We won't say much about it here. There's tons of resources, and we have a resource that's linked here. But one thing to know is that, the vast majority of people don't get a tax deductible or a charitable tax deduction for their donations. And the reason for that is that they take the standard deduction on their taxes. And so if you're kind of an average person and you take the standard deduction, then you don't need to prioritize giving to a 501c3. You can give to anyone because the tax impact is the same. You don't get any tax benefit. Um, but that said, sometimes you might make a major gift, or maybe you give away your home and questions will come up. So we have a handout there for you. Come back to this slide if it applies to you, but if you're over the age of 70 and a half, you can give directly from your nest egg, particularly your traditional IRA retirement account, to a charity, and that won't be taxed. So it's kind of a workaround where you can more or less get a charitable deduction even when you aren't otherwise eligible. Here's a slide with some of our resources on giving away land and homes. In particular, our Seeds of Land Return uh, toolkit has 9 different legal strategies you can use if you either want to share your home or give it away or set it up to transfer later. So you can come back to these resources. And estate planning is, of course, a very common way for people to redistribute wealth, but it takes a while because we have to wait till you die. And it's also, well, I guess it's an important topic to bring up mainly because about 60 to 70% of people die without estate plans. They don't have wills or trusts. And if that happens, there's a formula that divides up the wealth along a family line. So it keeps the money in a family. It doesn't redistribute it as broadly as you might want it to go. So it's important to have a will or a trust. And the reason why a lot of people don't is because lawyers make it expensive and complicated, let's face it. And so one of the messages we want to send here is just that it can be very simple. It could just be a handwritten document, at least in 23 states. We even have created a very simple will that people can use if you don't have one, and we hope to create more documents so more people can just do this for themselves. Okay, so that was all about people giving away wealth. Let's talk about foundations now. Foundations are like a mythical realm because there are so many myths that have been applied to foundations. Myths meaning misunderstandings of the law that have gotten perpetuated. And so we're going to try to do a little myth busting and talk about the fact that foundations can give to individuals. They can give to cooperatives and other non 501(c)(3)s. In many cases, they can give away their endowment. And so we'll share about that. Um, so first, it'll be important to talk about the difference between public charities, private foundations, and donor advised funds because it makes a legal difference, and we're going to be talking about them separately. So, a public charity, well, first of all, I want to say all of these things are 501(c)(3)s. They are all nonprofits. And so, yeah, that could be confusing. It tends to be that when people say the word nonprofit or 501(c)(3), they tend to be talking about a public charity. But a public charity means that it's a nonprofit 501(c)(3) that receives a substantial portion of its donations from the public, from like a collection of smaller gifts and donations. And because it receives this support from the public, there's a sense that it's more accountable to the public and is therefore subject to less scrutiny and fewer regulations. So public charities have a lot more latitude than these other two in terms of giving away their money. So foundations tend to have just one or a few donors and are subject to more regulations. And when I say foundation, I'm really talking about private foundations. There are actually things that call themselves foundations, but they might be donor advised funds or they might be public charities. So all of these words can be very confusing. But public charity, private foundation, and then what happens if you take a pink heart, sorry, a yellow heart, and you put it in a blue square is you get this other funny shape, and that's what is a donor advised fund here. And so donor advised funds are kind of like private foundations that are housed within public charities, but because they are more or less directed by a donor, uh, they are regulated a lot more like private foundations. Okay, that was all very boring, but it's important. So we're talking just now about private foundations. And can private foundations give to individuals? Yes, they rarely do, but we hope that they do more. And so we've tried to really elucidate how. And in our guide that you can click on, Give Money to People, will give you these different pathways. But in brief, if a foundation wants to give to an individual without creating any expectation that that individual do something in the future, then as long as it advances charitable purposes and as long as there's some criteria to make sure there's no private benefit happening, there's certain procedures in place to make sure it's not just favoring certain friends, then generally that's a fine way for foundations to give to individuals. So the way that's been most recognized is that foundations have given to people as awards or prizes based on their past work. The idea is if you give people awards, it advances charitable purposes because it incentivizes them to do good work. So it's kind of like the MacArthur Foundation's fellowship, grants based on past work. But you can also give to people based on their present needs. So if somebody is food insecure now and you give them money now, then it meets that need for now without obligating them to do anything in the future. So all of these rules are kind of weird. It's just somehow the law unfolded in this particular way, and this is what it is. But foundations, if they want to give to individuals to support those people to do things in the future, like carry out a charitable project, the foundation actually has to go to the IRS, describe the program to them, and get approval from the IRS before they can give away money. So it's probably worth the work to create a program and get that IRS approval, even if it takes time. Foundations can also pay individuals to do work in the future if it's for the foundation or benefiting the foundation in some way. So that would be a contract for services. Foundations can instead give money to a public charity and ask that public charity to create a program of giving to individuals. And lastly, foundations can give directly to individuals. They're just going to pay a lot of taxes on that. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Mo to talk about other things that foundations can do.
Yeah, so one of the big myths that we've been kind of teaching about and sharing about for years now, and including in our worker co-op world and program, is that foundations can give to non 501(c)(3) public charities. They can give to worker cooperatives, real estate cooperatives, and that's something that over our years of working with these different cooperatives, we see cooperatives doing like transformative social justice work and advancing charitable purposes, to use Iris's language. And oftentimes we serve as like an intermediary where foundations will give us money or other public charities money to then pass on to these cooperatives, but we just want to kind of encourage folks to dig into like how foundations can give money directly to these cooperatives and cut out kind of intermediaries that aren't really necessary. And we know that a lot of people might be familiar with this concept of expenditure responsibility, and it can feel very intimidating for folks. But we kind of encourage folks to try to embrace this. I mean, it's basically a requirement that means that you have to document like what activities the grantee is working on, verify that the funds are used to advance charitable purposes. It's not very hard and it requires the cooperation of the recipient, and you'll send the information to the IRS, but a lot of the paperwork is kind of already the kind of paperwork that foundations require for their grantees. So it might not actually be that much of a bigger lift than the kind of more cumbersome foundation reporting process that many of us are used to. Um, so yeah, that's a little bit on expenditure responsibility and giving to non-501(c)(3)s. Of course, there's also the foundations, giving to 501(c)(3) public charities that we're all probably more familiar with. This is kind of the typical thing that we expect foundations to do. But we just created a short guide that basically empowers funders in this position to not think that there are any legal requirements that make them have an application process, make them have a 10 or 40 or even 4-page grant agreement, and that you actually don't really need any of these documents or paperworks like to comply with the law. You just need to determine that the grant you're making advances a charitable purpose. And if you can confirm that the entity that you're giving to is a 501(c)(3) public charity, that's the main thing you need to confirm. And then you can give freely without much more red tape or any more red tape. And another topic we've presented about and written about in the last couple of years is endowment law. And in the nonprofit sector, we're talking about or about $1 trillion of nonprofit foundation assets that um, largely are probably sitting in Wall Street. And so, the typical foundation structure is 95% of the assets are kind of saved and invested and put in Wall Street and then are growing through extractive systems. And then they give away 5% a year to charitable causes. And yeah, so we basically created some resources that help folks inside foundations, leading foundations, advocating within foundations um, to to like basically bust their endowments. And what that could look like is, I mean, the first step of that is to actually understand what type of endowment your organization or this foundation has. And so a lot of times endowments are called that, but they don't actually have like a legal requirement that they be maintained. So, for example, we call capital E endowments the types of endowments where a donor makes a legally binding agreement when they give the assets to the foundation. This is like Henry Ford seeding the Ford Foundation and saying, you need to keep all of this money growing in perpetuity, and only the income you generate on that money can be redistributed to whoever you want. Henry Ford, I don't even think did that, by the way. But um, the that is what we call a capital E endowment, where the donor actually restricts the funds when giving to the foundation. A lowercase e endowment, or basically, which is not really an endowment at all, but people use it that way, is when the board has decided to designate a certain amount of funds as not for spending now. And so the board might designate certain funds, so that sometimes shows up in accounting books as like board created endowment, board designated endowments. And that is just much easier to change, because if the board created that restriction, then it can remove that restriction pretty easily. And so yeah, that's and then sometimes people call endowments uh things endowments that don't have any either of those restrictions at all. And so yeah, so getting clear on what endowment law is, and then in the next slide we'll kind of talk about investing the endowment or non-endowment. And we're not going to talk a lot about mission related and program related investments. But just briefly, that program-related investments do have to meet IRS standards for charitable purposes. And then that can count towards your 5% spending limit. MRIs don't. And in general, and MRIs are kind of like this fictitious category. In general, we don't view, as in it's not rooted in any like legal definition. We don't view either of them as substantially redistributing wealth, and we have a short video talking about the difference. Um, Another legal framework is that this concept of prudent investment. And most states have a law on the prudent management of institutional funds. And it can be interpreted to require foundations and nonprofits to invest their money and earn returns like regular capitalists. But we've created this sample board resolution on abolishing investment. And so basically, if a foundation or a nonprofit wants to try to exempt itself from this UPMIFA, the Uniform Prudent Management Law that is probably operative in your state, um, then it can basically designate its assets to basically designate all of its assets to be program related, and that through the complexities of the law can exempt it from having to be invested in extractive systems. Um, and then and then in the next slide, we're talking about um, just these are some bigger picture questions, and in the future we might develop some sample bylaws on this or something like that. But um, I mean, we believe not just in the redistribution of wealth, but also the redistribution of power, of how that wealth in foundations is um, stewarded and where it's channeled to. And so, yeah, so we've worked with funders and workshop different models of, let's say, making one round of grant making to the most amazing people you can think of. Sorry. And then empowering those people to join the board and lead the foundation moving forward. Okay, I'm going to take a beat and get some water. Okay, next up are donor advised funds. Um, so we recently wrote a public comment letter about the new proposed donor advised fund regulations. And and one of the things that we point out is that a donor advised fund like basically empowers donors to like start a mini private foundation that they have checkbook control over distributions, but they get some of the tax benefits of giving to a public charity. And so that's why it's such a popular tool and one of the fastest growing tools. I think more people are giving money to DAFs than foundations these days, and we kind of highlight the legal fiction where the law says that the sponsoring public charity is supposed to have legal control of over the funds, but in reality, DAFs just like allow donor-dominated philanthropy. Um, anyway, it's a bit of a rabbit hole. So if you want to get into it, we link to the blog post summary or the full comment letter. And I can pass it back to Janelle.
All right, so donor advised funds. Can they give to individuals? It's a little complicated because the law actually says that DAFs would have to pay a tax if they give to natural persons. Interestingly, the tax is not that much. It's only 25%, so maybe it's not such a bad thing. But there's a couple other ways that DAFs can kind of get money to individuals. One is to pay a person under a contract for services. So if somebody's going to engage in a charitable project that is closely related to the DAF's purpose, or remembering DAFs are under the sponsor of a public charity, something that advances the work of that organization, then you can contract with people and pay them. You can use an intermediary, dispersing the funds to a public charity and asking them to set up an individual giving program. Or you can undaff. You could take that pool of funds and make it not a DAF. So I'll talk about that in a moment. Okay, so DAFs can give to non-501c3s like cooperatives, and it's just like with private foundations, they have to do expenditure responsibility, which is just gathering a little bit extra information from the grantee about how they spent the funds and sending that information to the IRS, just making sure it all advances charitable purposes. The problem is that DAF sponsors, the umbrella organizations that house these DAFs, a lot of them are just reluctant to do this in our experience. They'll be like, we don't have our procedure set up for that yet. And they don't seem to ever actually set those up. So we want to encourage DAF sponsors to get themselves set up to do expenditure responsibility because it's not hard. And um, yeah, and if you have a DAF and you want to be giving directly to cooperatives, which is a wonderful thing to do, you might want to consider maybe moving DAF sponsors to a sponsor that's going to support you to do that. There's also a publication we link to here that suggests a few DAF sponsors. That's from Resource Generation. So what about undaffing? What does it mean to undaff? We just made that word up. But what it means to undaff is to become not donor advised. So here it is, there's a pool of funds within the public charity. If that pool of funds, if part of it is separated out, and if the donor asks the sponsor, hey, instead of me deciding what happens with this money, can you appoint a committee, and that committee will decide, and you can set some parameters. You could say, I want that to be a fund that goes to individuals and cooperatives. And basically, this would allow the money to go to individuals and cooperatives more freely without constraints, without expenditure responsibility. So you would basically be creating a little democratically controlled fund within the public charity. So yeah, that could be worth exploring if the sponsor is willing. DAFs giving to 501c3s, this is relatively straightforward, so there's not much to say here. But I will say, as being part of a public charity that receives money from DAFs, It has been very helpful in meeting the public support test. There's something kind of funny about DAF money. When you get money from a DAF, it's considered to be public support rather than private support for the purpose of meeting the public support test. This is something that a lot of nonprofits do need to worry about is if they get a big donation from one source, they're at risk of being viewed as a private foundation. So it's almost like a loophole in the law that if it comes from a DAF, it's not considered private support. So all of this is to say, if there's a new nonprofit and you want to give it a whole lot of money, it's actually kind of beneficial if you can run that money through a donor advised fund. So then that small nonprofit doesn't have to worry about becoming a private foundation. So that's just an aside, but not much else to say about DAFs giving to 501c3s. I guess this is where I pass it back to you, Mo.
Yeah, thank you. So we'll talk about how public charities can redistribute wealth. And again, these are nonprofits that meet the public support test. They're public charities. And yeah, so as far as public charities giving to individuals, this is something they do all the time, particularly to people who are experience economic distress, poverty, or other challenges. Basically, the main distinction here is if the grant is to relieve a person's hardship, then it can be treated as untaxed. Um, and and if it's a gift given out of yeah, and that would be if it's a gift given out of generosity and with no expectation of the recipient doing anything in return. And then, on the other hand, public charities can also pay money to individuals if they decide that that individual is doing work that advances charitable purposes, um, and they want to get that individual to, or the kind of implicit string is that they want to get that person to keep doing those charitable activities that they're doing, then that would likely be considered taxable income to the recipient. And I know so yeah, I know the main question. So for public charities doing this work, like they want to avoid having the recipient pay taxes on that money, and so that it can be work kind of like digging into these pages of the guide, the Give Money to People guide, and trying to avoid, the recipient having to pay taxes if possible. Um, yeah, and then as far as public charities giving to cooperatives or non-501c3s, this is something addressed in our legal toolkit on funding economic democracy. But the main thing to note is that because the because this is an entity that passes the public support test, the law is basically a little bit more deferential to the disbursements of public charities. So it's easier for public charities to give, like the Sustainable Economies Law Center, to give to cooperatives, or other non-501c3s doing great work, compared to donor advised funds or foundations. And that's something that we at the Law Center have done, and it requires a fairly simple agreement saying that or confirmation email saying that the cooperative will use the funds to advance charitable purposes. And yeah, we try to avoid the red tape that we talked about above. And yeah, I think, is there anything you'd want to add to that, Janelle? Okay,
That's great.
cool.
Thanks.
Um, Yeah, and then the next slide talks about this wonderful image that Janelle made, about how public charities can give to each other. And there's not too much to say because it's very simple to do. And there's very little need for paperwork or monitoring. Um, and um, and then I can kind of give a quick story about a time that the Sustainable Economies Law Center has done this and kind of what drove us and how we made the gift, with Poor Magazine, which is a poor person-led, indigenous person-led grassroots media and arts organization that uplifts poor people's solutions to the to poverty and the housing crisis. Both the Law Center and Poor Magazine is based in Oakland. But Poor Magazine is not a grant-funded or staffed nonprofit. They operate despite philanthropy, and they are a mutual aid organization of poor and unhoused people keeping their community alive. And they also organize people with wealth and class privilege, like me, to help them liberate Mama Earth so poor people can build their own housing and healing sanctuary on it. Their People School offering, which is offered regularly, is my favorite class I've ever taken. And so the Law Center hustles for grants, right, to maintain our 19-person staff. I'm on that team, others are too. Um, Last year, we had a small surplus of funds that felt small in the context of our budget, but we felt like we had to use it to support our community and particularly our housing team proposed making a distribution to Poor Magazine to support especially the unhoused community that's facing escalating violence in Oakland, especially after grants pass, and the state crackdown on being poor. And so this was a grant that we made with no strings attached, no grant agreement. We confirmed their tax exempt status, wrote up how the partner, basically acknowledging that we need this partner to be resourced in order for our housing justice work to continue and to flourish, and that our kind of fates are intertwined in that way. And we made that gift. And so I'll pass it back to Janelle to close out.
All right. Okay, so here's something that comes up all the time, especially in our work at Sustainable Economies Law Center, because we support economic democracy. We support a lot of organizations that are led by the very people that the organizations are designed to support. So this brings up a whole set of big words that are very confusing and that tend to mandate creating a little bit of red tape, actually, because you have to create some procedures. But basically, if a nonprofit wants to give support to one of its leaders, let's say a nonprofit is providing housing to one of their leaders. This happens with a lot of the land organizations we work with. Or a nonprofit wants to give some form of aid to support one of their leaders who's experiencing hardship, then they may be engaging in what's called self-dealing, or they may be transacting with a disqualified person. And so, what you need to do in this situation, and let me just say, this is totally doable. You can do this. You just have to jump through a set of hoops. And the purpose of those hoops is to show that this transaction and that this decision is being made in the best interest of the nonprofit without bias toward that particular leader. So, it tends to involve having a meeting to discuss it without that leader present and looking at other options for achieving the same purposes, and then ultimately coming to the decision that, okay, this is in the best interest of our organization to do so because blah, blah, blah. And you always need to put this down on paper because these are the kinds of transactions you have to report to oversight agencies like the IRS. But we're in the middle of updating our resource on this. We had a resource on it and realized that we needed to kind of dig into the complications a little more. So if you come back later, this will be a live link. Right now, you can't access it. Um, okay, last topic before we get to Q&A is businesses and cooperatives that are redistributing wealth. And because they're not 501c3s with all the rules that apply to them, they're quite free to give their money away, much as individuals are. A different set of questions might come up though, which is that often when businesses are giving money away, understandably, they'd be asking themselves, can we get a tax benefit? And the two primary tax benefits are uh, they can give money in a way that could be treated as a deductible business expense because the rule is that businesses can deduct expenses that are considered ordinary and necessary to running the business. And so if they make a gift that is about promoting or that really substantially promotes the business in some way, like let's say they sponsor an event being held by a nonprofit and their logo is going to be there with links to their websites and that kind of thing, then that might be viewed as an ordinary and necessary business expense because it promotes the business. The business can also make a gift to a 501(c)(3) and have that be a deductible charitable donation, but in that case, it really shouldn't get anything in return. It maybe its logo can be mentioned, its name, it can be on a list of donors, but not in a way that really promotes the business. So if it wants to do something that's kind of in between, like, yeah, benefit the nonprofit and we get some promotion, if you mix those two motives, you may actually jeopardize access to a tax benefit because it cancels one or the other tax deduction. So you kind of need to choose one way or another, which, this is how the law forces us to divide our motives in awkward ways, but that's basically the two ways to get the deduction. And there may be situations where you just don't take a deduction at all. Let's say a business wants to give to another business. And in the realm of cooperatives, there is a cooperative principle of cooperatives supporting other cooperatives. And you might just have a co-op make a gift to a co-op because they love and want to support that co-op. In that case, the co-op that's receiving it could quite likely treat it as a tax-free gift. So that's really sweet. The cooperative that's giving it probably can't get any tax benefit at all because it's not a necessary and ordinary business expense to give away your money. Um, and yeah, we have a list of cases you can click on here that there's been a lot of court cases where businesses make gifts and then the court tries to figure out, was that a real gift or was that income to the recipient, that kind of thing. So yeah, that brings us to questions and thoughts or other needs or commentary. And I know that people have been putting questions in the chat. I think our coworker Erica has been trying to keep up with those and might help us highlight where we want to go from here. So I guess maybe the best way to do it is people can raise their hands, but maybe while hands are going up, either Mo or Erica, do you want to highlight any questions that we might start with?
Well, I just want to thank Erica for answering some of the questions in real time.
Oh,
And um, I feel like this question about undaffing, I'm kind of drawn to right now. So Hive Mind, Matthew asks about situation in the Athens area community foundation, where HiveMind could potentially act as an advisor to funds that were previously in a DAF, but given in alignment with their vision. Um, and the foundation seems to be insisting that HiveMind become a 501(c)(3). And I just thought my knee-jerk reaction to this question is that I don't know why the foundation is asking that. Because in order to undaff, as we're talking about it, basically what that means is to relinquish the donor's control over the funds to advisory control. Um, and if basically there's a DAF holder that wants to relinquish their advisory privileges over the fund, they want to give it to the community or a few people that they really trust in the community, then those people don't have to have any kind of status, like as the people that will advise the distributions of where the money will be spent. And so at least for the narrow question, maybe there are other considerations the foundation is thinking about, but like the narrow question of like, in order to undaff, do you need to give advisory control over to other public charities? Like, no, I think they just need to be given to like they have, yeah, like to other people that isn't the donor. Does that sound right, Janelle?
that sounds right. As long as it's not the donor dictating who takes control, it needs to be someone else, like the DAF sponsor needs to appoint whoever it is that's going to decide about the funds. In a way, it becomes like a fiscally sponsored project under the DAF as opposed to sorry, a fiscally sponsored project under the charity as opposed to a DAF under the charity. It's like a new program.
And I had one more follow-up question that just wanted to check if any other staff people at the Law Center have an answer to the question about um, giving gifts to people that don't affect folks' benefits, like Social Security, disability, any creative solutions, and Erica put in the chat that gifts usually count as income for many benefits programs. I don't know if Janelle or others have more to say on that.
Right. This is we should put this on our to-do list. We have an internal document about this where our coworker Ari was doing research, looking at each benefit program and what types of gifts are counted. Sometimes if you live with somebody rent-free, you're even expected to report the value of your rent-free housing as income. It's just I hate that. But yeah, each program defines differently what you actually need to report. Um, so it's a good reminder that there's yet more resources to create. Thanks for raising this question.
Did anyone want to raise hand and ask any question before we keep going through chat questions? Take a minute. Would love to hear some more voices in the space. I can quickly say that the question about benefit and inurement, private benefit versus private inurement, to me, they seem like synonyms. Um, there might be some other nuances, but I think they basically mean the same thing. Or, well, Janelle, maybe.
Oh, the question is about the difference between private benefit and private inurement.
Yeah.
There is a nuanced difference there. Private private inurement is when you benefit an insider, like somebody who has influence over the organization, board member, founder, other leader, key staff person. Whereas private benefit could happen to somebody who has no control over the organization, but it's still inappropriate because 501(c)(3)s, charities are supposed to benefit the public, which is the broad public, as opposed to operating for the benefit of a small segment of society. So any organization that seems to be just benefiting a very small segment of society is engaging in improper private benefit, which isn't actually inurement. Yeah, it doesn't rise to the level of inurement unless it's an insider benefiting. Yeah. This is why we have to update our handout because there's so many different words, interested person, disqualified person, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah. It's hard for me to keep up with the all of the chats and questions.
Um, yeah, I think Erica answered the one about a gift versus a contract. I don't know if that person wanted to ask any follow-ups about that, Jesse. And then um and then there was another question about whether examples of foundations that have seen the light and are giving outside traditional funding pathways, giving away with their endowments and giving to non-501(c)(3)s. I mean, I believe the Katala Foundation just left, but or someone from there, like they definitely give to a lot of non-501(c)(3)s, and they don't invest in Wall Street, and they're a spend down foundation. And there's definitely plenty of others similar to that that Justice Funders helps organize. Okay, bye, Abdia. Um, and yeah,
I
and
see
if
a
you
question
are,
about,
yeah,
Mhm.
if
I
you're, I
see a
mean, if you're
question about, go ahead.
Sorry, just thought I'd make a plug for like if you're a funder or you know funders that want to push themselves more in that direction, Justice Funders and Solidare are two networks amongst others that could be good places to go.
Yeah. I was noticing this question about are volunteer gift cards for community members considered taxable income? If so, are there any workarounds? For example, gift cards given in thanks to volunteers doing community outreach. So, this is kind of a little gray area there. Um, when you give somebody something in exchange because they actually did some work or did something for you, that could be considered income to them. Um, Also, the definition of volunteer, and this is employment law purposes, is that people are doing work without expectation of compensation. And so if they were expecting the gift card, that somewhat undermines the idea that they're a volunteer. It could make them look more like an employee. So I think it's actually important to be careful when you're doing stuff like gift cards as a thank you for volunteers. If it's a small gift card, that might be the kind of thing that the IRS would just sort of disregard as de minimis. De minimis means it's just too small to even matter. Examples of de minimis gifts are like giving people donuts when they volunteer. Donuts are arguably fuel for the volunteers, but it could also just be like one of these little gifts that the IRS would disregard. Um, but yeah, I would just sort of be careful with that. Keep the gift cards small. Don't set up the expectation that people are volunteering in exchange for them, and maybe don't use them at all. I don't know. But, or maybe you wish you hadn't asked, just pretend this conversation never happened. I see Jesse Kate has a hand up.
Yeah, hi. This is really fun, and I can't wait to look through all the resources because there's a ton there. Yeah, just sort of continuing to play with the gift and income distinction. It seems like, for example, if on principle one were to refuse to ever accept a salary or any income, and therefore you were in economic need, and then you were to receive gifts from charities, and now I have resources that I've received as a gift, but I can also gift that to other people. We could create a sort of infinite flow of gifts that are, which is not to say, by the way, that taxes are not necessarily bad in and of themselves, and I struggle with that a little bit in some of these contemplations, because I think we also need taxes to go towards useful services for communities writ large. But let's say, for example, you didn't support where taxes are being used, or yeah, other motivations. It just seems like, potentially an interesting approach to giving ourselves over to like the true need, sentiment of reciprocity.
Yeah, I love it. You're really beginning to paint that fuller picture of what a gift economy looks like, where a lot of people are just offering their time and energy and labor without expectation of something in return. And
Yeah.
also, they have needs because they're humans, and so people are giving to them gifts without the expectation of anything in return. And so they're just, yeah, you set up this flow. It starts to just everything rises above tax law. It rises above employment law to a good degree. And it's not to say that taxes and employment law are not important and necessary areas of law in life. But yeah, I mean, taxes are a form of redistribution depending on how you think of it. But yeah, I think as we move, I feel like we could move a lot more of our economy into that realm of free-flowing gift of people giving without the expectation of something in return, because we begin to trust that we will be given to when we have needs. And I think, gosh, that's going to be such a sweet world. Let's go there.
Cool. Thank you.
I'm going to share the slides in the chat again just because that's where all the gold is, all the links, all the resources. That's where we get into real detail. We just glossed over everything today, and you can go as deep as you want here.
And I'm seeing Alice's, well, I really appreciate Stephen's question about making the rounds, shaking my finger at local orgs, nonprofits, and foundations to redistribute power and become more democratic. I feel like there's a lot of pitches out there in that direction. There's a lot of writing in this field. I'll see if I can pull up a compendium or something. But um, Yeah, I don't have much more to say on that, but I was curious if Alice or Stephen, you wanted to unmute and say more about your question. Alice, I'm not sure if I'm fully understanding your question, so I'd love to hear more about it.
Yeah, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Um, yeah, no, first of all, thanks for this whole seminar. This has just been fabulous and mind opening. But my question was there was someone, I think Julia up above, way up in the chat, who talked about the grassroots funds who give gifts to non 501c3s and they don't require fiscal sponsorship. And I was just wondering how that worked, what that looked like, and what were the benefits and or concerns to both parties, the funder as well as then the recipients.
Yeah. Yeah, 501c3s, like we've discussed, can give to individuals and non-501c3s. I mean, the key is you want to make sure that charitable purposes are being advanced. Either the gift itself advances charitable purpose because it's meeting an immediate hardship, or meeting an immediate need because of hardship, or it advances charitable purposes because the individuals or the cooperatives are going out and doing good work in the world. And so I guess there's just a little work involved for the donor, for the grant maker, to make sure that that charitable purpose is being met. So you either need to gather a little information about the person's needs, or you need to gather information about what they're going to do with the money. So I guess the short of it is it just creates a little more paperwork to make sure you're advancing charitable purposes. I will say a lot of particularly larger organizations are subject to audits, which are private auditors, CPAs having to audit the books of the organization. They're not so much worried about the IRS coming and saying anything about it, but the auditors are the ones who kind of look at the donations you make and look at the rules and say, all right, are you following the rules? Are you getting paperwork for this? And that's what puts a lot of pressure on these organizations to just keep things as simple as possible. And so, yeah, sorry, I just rambled a little bit there, but I guess it's all doable. I think a lot of funders just don't want to do it because they feel like it's more complicated
It
than
seems more
regular.
less complicated. It seems more simple. Is it just that they are afraid of what they perceive as a risk? An auditor is going to call them on it? Because I can see lots of like, I mean, I guess Julia was saying, a nonprofit, a group of folks want to come together and, build a community garden or, whatever the communal work is. And they get a small, a $25,000 grant or whatever that pays for 10 people to, do this work or whatnot. And what is the difference of why the funder would require them to be to go through and get a fiscal sponsorship? Then the fiscal sponsor wants, 8 to 10%. Then they have all this paperwork and and then by the time they're done, right, the people who originally wanted to just do this work, just kind of,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, are put in this
Yeah.
position where, as if they were just gifted it, right? They could go out and buy the tools that they need to do the cleanup and make the garden and right, and give themselves, some return to in putting their time. Or is it that that's not perceived as being valuable, to public benefit, their labor?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm struggling with.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I guess, you're pointing out that it just makes things more complicated. The requirement of having a fiscal sponsor makes things more complicated, but it's not more complicated for the funders, and they're the ones who really have all the power. And I do think a lot of funders try to keep things simple for themselves, sort of. I mean, the irony is, I think a lot of funders overcomplicate things. They create these extensive grant application processes and reporting requirements and grant agreements that are way more complicated than need be. I think there's a lot of reasons for that. Professionals advising them to do so, making themselves feel important. I don't know. But yeah, when it comes to taking a little bit of risk in giving to non-501c3s, we just see so many funders shy away from it, but I really don't think it's that risky. It does just require a little more care and a little bit more of a paper trail. So yeah, thanks for raising that.
No, thank you. Is there last part of this? Is there one piece of your great compendium of resources that addresses this issue of gifting to non-fiscally sponsored local groups that just want to do the good work?
Yeah, I would say our legal guide that's called Legal Toolkit on Funding Economic Democracy is mostly about giving to non-501c3s.
Okay, thank
Yeah,
you.
we talk a little bit about the use of intermediaries and fiscal sponsors there when are they needed. Yeah, thanks, Mo.
Thank you so much, Janelle.
Mhm. Oh, I see a question from Kaz about has the landscape changed? I would say since the Law Center started 15 years ago, the funding world has progressed a lot in becoming more flexible, more open to possibility, less inclined to create red tape. Things have actually gotten a lot easier for us. We've gotten a lot more general operating support. We've spent much less time in those horrible funding portals filling out forms. So things are getting better. Let's keep that momentum going and keep making it better. And I see Marianne has a hand up, so that might be our last question.
Oh, just a quick PS in addition to saying thank you so much. You talked about the 19,000 and then the gift exemption limit for an individual, which is some certain amount that you mentioned, 13 million federally, something like that. But then just to
13.3.
note, and tell me if I'm right, each state has a different gift exemption level. So that I know, for instance, Minnesota is 3 million. So you would actually maybe pay taxes over 3 million at the state level.
Oh, I didn't know that actually. Just add that to our little to-do list of a thing to
Yeah.
write about. Our current handout on gift taxes is only one page. So now it's probably going
You
to be
keep
2
it short,
pages.
but I just learned that recently, and all different states have different levels.
Oh, okay. All right, well, we'll find out more. This is good. I just saved the chat. We have a video. This basically just added to our to-do list of resources to create. So good
Thank
thing for
you.
coming. Grateful. And please send us questions and feedback because that actually really drives our work. So yeah, grateful for everyone here and your contributions.
And can you say just a little bit about sharing this video and, remuneration payment to SELC in the sharing and all of that? Have you made a decision about that?
Yeah, we are going to put this on our YouTube channel. So our YouTube channel is called the Selk Tube. That's probably the easiest way to find it, but you can search around for workshops on our website in a few weeks and it'll probably be there. Since you asked about remuneration, most of you all paid to be here. So thank you for that, especially if you're a lawyer and you paid $100. My gosh. Anyways, gratitude. Sustainable Economies Law Center also always needs support. And as you just heard from Mo, when we get too much support, we give it away to good work. So please know any gifts will be going to good work. Yeah, Mo, do you want to add anything right here at the end?
No, just appreciating y'all for being here and all of the great questions and energy in the chat. This is awesome.
Yeah, that was fun. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.